Welcome to the ECE Classroom Podcast with your host, Susie Beghin, inspiring early childhood educators every day. Hello, and welcome to the ECE Classroom Podcast. My name is Susie Beghin, and I'm the host of the show. Today, we have a special guest joining us to talk all about lifelong learning and professional development. Her name is Ana Valle Rivera, and I'd like to welcome her to the show. Welcome, Ana.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, I found you actually on Instagram. I was following your pages, and I really like your content. I know you do a lot of work on professional development, so I thought maybe first of all, before we get started, tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and your business.
Yes, of course. So my name is Ana. I am a public speaker, workshop facilitator, and the founder of Early Years Thriving. And so through Early Years Thriving, I provide quite a bit of professional development. And recently we collected how much professional development, right? And I have facilitated over 300 workshop sessions in my career. I've been involved in adult learning for the last 10 years, but really focused in on providing professional development to early childhood educators about 8 years ago. I have a variety of different topics that I cover, and I just really love connecting with educators, providing them with meaningful resources, and I think most of all, honestly, I just enjoy making people laugh.
Tell us a little bit where you're located. Where are you in Canada?
Yes, I am in Canada. So I actually grew up in East Vancouver, and I now live in the Tri-Cities area, which is a little bit of outside of Vancouver. And yeah, most of my work is the in-person work that I do is in this area, but I also provide a lot of the workshops that I do through Zoom.
Okay, wonderful. Good to know. All right, so let's delve right into the topic. So today we're going to be talking, like I said, about professional development. I always thought that professional development is something that is crucial in early childhood. I think professional development really is the most effective way for early childhood educators to contribute to the success of the children that they teach. So can you tell me a little bit of what you think about that? And what do you think about how professional development affects children's learning?
Yeah, 100%. I think that it does contribute to the success of the children and the families, but really, when I think of professional development, I'm thinking about the educators and helping the educator thrive and the educator stay inspired, right? Because if the educator's not inspired and thriving, then yes, there will be that negative effect on the children and the families. And also, I really believe that educators who are not jumping into these learning opportunities with a growth mindset, with an open mindset, and they're coming in really closed off, they might already be on the verge of burnout, or they're headed there, right? Because they're not letting that positive influence, that positive learning, even critical learning to get through to them. Which will show up negatively in their work. So yes, 100%, I do agree that when the educator is keeping up with professional development, and not just professional development, really it's more about professional learning, right? So it's not just about needing those hours or needing that certificate or getting the minimum of what the standard is, right? It's about going above and beyond, because we ourselves are wanting to learn. And we have that zest for learning, and all of that transfers over into our work and positively impacts the children.
Yeah, I would say so. We did an episode, one of our very first episodes was all about burnout. We talked all about it's very real in this early childhood education field, especially after COVID. That's when it really peaked, I think, and it has affected the industry in such a huge way. So I do believe that professional learning helps to keep us, a little bit on our toes, to know what's new and interesting in the field and kind of keep us interested and, reconnect us back with our why of why are we doing what we're doing. And when we learn new things, I think that helps to motivate us.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, like professional development, it shouldn't be just about like going and getting a certificate, right? Because I think, at least in my mind, when I think about professional development, I think about the hours that educators need. I think about, and those are very important, of course, the hours and the standard that we have to keep up with. But when I think of professional learning, and professional development as a part of professional learning, I think about a more broad way of, absorbing the information and being in touch with like best practices and continuing to stay inspired. So like listening to a podcast, for example, like for me, I consider that a professional learning opportunity, or joining like a dialogue circle, or taking like things that are self-paced, or listening to audiobooks, right? These Some of these things don't come with a certificate, and maybe in your, depending on your province or your state, it might not necessarily, be part of your hours that you need. But all of these other ways of learning, these other ways to connect with learning, they can also, benefit you and keep you inspired. And I strive. So I'm going to go back to the making people laugh, because I strive to make learning enjoyable. I had a horrible elementary school experience. I have healed a lot of the I want to say educational scars that I grew up with, and I'm healing through completing a master in education, in professional education in early childhood, and doing the work that I do. I really do feel like it's healing for me, because I get to make learning fun the way that I wish it was for me when I was in elementary school, right? And not making learning about shame, and not making it something that people hate or that people think is boring, because I really do strive to be relatable, to make jokes that make people laugh in a wholesome way, of course, but get people connected through the learning, through emotion, and not the negative emotions that, I think are really tied to practices of the past in education, like shame, right? And, making people feel like they're not good enough, or there's some sort of competition, or feeling scared to share their thoughts, or question, or have discussion, all of these like questioning, having discussion, having disagreement, talking about like what our different perspectives are, and we're not all going to agree, and that's a wonderful thing. Okay, this is all, to me, professional learning, and it is all inspiring, and it is all helpful in the field.
I would 100% agree with that. There's so many ways to learn, and everything that you said resonates with me. I have a play-based learning philosophy for children, and I think the same applies to adults. I always say that children learn best through play. They learn best when they're having fun, but that extends to adults too. I think adults learn best when they're having fun, when they're enjoying themselves. We all, as a human species, I believe, learn through play, learn through things that are giving us enjoyment, right? So you saying that making learning fun is wonderful. Like I'm all on board with that,
Yes,
and yeah.
absolutely.
Even
And
when you said things like listening to a podcast, reading a book, or listening to an audiobook, or whatever the case may be, those are all great learning opportunities. And I know in our province, I'm in Ontario, our registered early childhood educator designation, we have to do a certain number of hours to maintain the profession, because we are a profession, let's say. And things like reading books and listening to podcasts, and those are all counting towards professional learning. And it's great that my province does recognize that, but perhaps some provinces or states don't recognize it. So I'm glad that you mentioned that there's so many different ways to learn, and there's so many interesting, fun ways to get information that is going to help you in your profession.
yeah, you're absolutely correct. And so through Early Years Thriving, I have participants from all over the world, all over Canada, all over the US. And, they'll often ask me things like, does this count in my state? Does this count in my province? Am I going to get professional development hours? And like the reality is I can't answer that for everybody. I can answer it for people in Ontario, people in BC, because I'm in BC and I know the rules here. And I know that in Ontario, that professional learning, there is such a variety of ways that you can access that. This is wonderful. This is how we should be doing it, because it really gives educators the opportunity to engage in ways that are different, and not just, like I said, attending that workshop, attending that lecture, getting the certificate, and they're just there sometimes for the certificate. And I have felt that as a facilitator. The part that really matters is you taking charge of your own learning. So for me, it's taking charge of my own learning, walking in there with a growth mindset, walking in there, being open to making meaning and really thinking how this learning can impact my practice. It's not the facilitator's job to make sure that I get something out of it, really. It's my job.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you again. I have been in workshops where, yes, the content is familiar to me. I know the content, but there's always perspective, right? Somebody can present content in a different way to you that just kind of sparks a little interest or a little something that you didn't consider before. So I think having that growth mindset is important when going into professional learning experiences, because there's always something you can take away. There's always something you can learn, even if you know the content. You can take away different kinds of perspectives, different kinds of ways of approaching the information. So I totally agree with you on that. On another note, you mentioned virtual learning and in-person learning in the beginning. How do you feel about the difference between virtual versus in-person? Do you think there's a difference? Do you think that one is more beneficial than the other? I know in the past 4 years, we've generally tended towards virtual learning, but I still think there's something to be said for in-person. So I'd like your opinion on that, since you're an expert in this area.
Okay, here's my answer that I find like I'm always dancing somewhere in the middle. I have to say it just depends. It depends on the topic. It depends on what the purpose of that learning is, right? It depends on the facilitator. It depends on, what the opportunity is. Because for, the wonderful thing about being online is that we get to do this. You're in Ontario, I'm in BC, and we are learning from each other, and we are getting to engage in this collaborative dialogue, and it's wonderful, right? So there are those benefits to that. Now the in-person workshops are also great for, I think, connecting on that personal level, right? There's another feeling that you get when you're in the same space, you're sharing the space, you're sharing thoughts, there's more like a personal connection that happens when you're in person. And I love that as well as a learner, but also as the facilitator. It's so much easier to read the room. It's so much better to hear the laughter in person, because on Zoom, that was the hardest part for me with getting on Zoom, was not hearing the laughter. Like saying things that I knew was kind of like, oh, people usually laugh at this. And then it was like quiet. And I'm like, oh yeah, everybody has their mics turned off. So I do love in person. I love the in person workshops, the one off workshops to connect, but the connection's really brief. I love going to conferences, because I feel like with conferences, it's a different energy level. But again, it's like a one off, you're there and then everybody goes. And then, some people follow, some people you keep in touch with, and most of the people you don't. What I actually really love is providing workshops in sessions. Now, in BC, and I think in Ontario as well, but we call them communities of practice, where educators will gather for a longer period of time to be able to dive deep into whatever it is that you are learning. So for me, I think if I want to say like what the best type of learning experiences are, they have been the ones that have happened in session or in community of practice. And you just build a deeper connection with that group over a longer period of time, which also helps people to open up. And it helps people to be able to have like these really tough discussions and question and share their different perspectives that they wouldn't have in a one-off workshop, whether it's in person or online, because I've done communities of practice and courses and sessions and stuff like that online. But I have to say the in-person longer period of time together, it just provides a better experience. If we're having to label which way is the best, I don't like to, say it's the best, but for people who can attend. Now, here's the other thing. I do acknowledge that to be able to join a community of practice, in-person sessions, a course or whatever, there's also a level of privilege that comes with that, because I have been pregnant 3 times in the last decade. And while I was pregnant, while I was having morning sickness, while I was having the newborn, I could not commit to something like that. And I know that there are other people for whatever other reason, right? In ECE, somebody might be working 2 or 3 jobs,
Yes.
right? To make ends meet. Somebody might be like a single mother who has children. So I resist saying it is the best way, because it is actually the most privileged way also to be able to have the time to dedicate to going in person and doing that. That means that you have childcare. That means that you have the resources to do it. Time is so precious. So I resist that, because I think all ways of learning are beneficial. Like listening to an audiobook on your way to work, guess what? That has been a game changer for me. It can be just as game changing depending on your mindset.
Yeah. I have been part of communities of practice here within my particular region. And I have to say that even just the networking that happens at those meetings, where you just get to know people, you get different perspectives, like I said, you can always learn from each other. And that's the great part about those communities of practice, that you're not just learning from the the instructor of that particular session, but from each other, from each of the participants. We all have something to contribute. We all have something to say, and we can learn a lot from each other. So thank you for bringing that up. If nobody has ever been to a community of practice, I really, really recommend it. If you have one within your area, whether online or in person, like you said, depending on what your needs are. So I just want to ask another question about one thing that has come up in my own experience as well, because I deliver trainings as well within my area. And one thing that's come up is that um, participants will say, I'm so excited when I'm at the workshop. I have all these ideas, but then when I go back to my job, it's really hard to implement. It's really hard to stay excited, put it into practice. What do you think? What would you say to somebody like that? How can they translate the information or the knowledge that they've gained into their practice?
Yeah. I think that there are a couple of strategies, okay, that I usually give to people. Number one, was there a call to action? Because most facilitators will give you the call. Like they will let you know how you can implement the learning into your practice. So take note when you're going into professional learning, is there a call to action? Is there a way that you can think about implementing it and remind yourself of that somehow? And then the other thing is continue the learning. So you can continue the learning by also sharing what you learned. That is one, strategy that I always say, like go and share and have these conversations with your colleagues about what you learned. Now, the other way that you can continue the learning is actually taking 1 or 2 parts of whatever was said, even if it was just one thing, and continue the learning. Like actually dive deeper into the learning and set yourself a time, maybe the week after, where you're going to deep dive on that. Now, if you're like me, you're going to binge, because that's just the way that I am, right? Like when I learn about something new or somebody new, I'm like, I must know everything right now. And then I take note of that and I go for it. And I'll find, does the person have a TED Talk? Do they have articles? Do they have a book, right? I go on that deep dive, and that's how I keep myself accountable to continue the learning.
Yeah. And I think that flows really well into our next question, which is about how to become a lifelong learner. I always believe that learning is not something that has a beginning or an end. It's just continuous. So tell me a little bit, as we end off the podcast, tell me a little bit about how we can encourage educators to be lifelong learners.
Yeah. And so part of it, I think, is just providing accessible ways to learn. Just entering these learning spaces, being open is really important. And so not creating shame around learning or about types of learning or about different perspectives. I think that helps us to be leaders in modeling how we can make the most of our learning and, sharing with each other about the opportunities that are out there and encouraging each other to like join in on, let's say we're going to go to a conference or, oh, I found this really great community of practice. You want to come with me? Or, helping each other in that way. I think that's the best way that we can help each other to become lifelong learners.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you so much today for sharing all of your insights. Tell our listeners a little bit about how they can find you if they want to do a deep dive into some of the work that you do.
For sure. Okay, so our handle on Instagram is at Early Years Thriving. And then if you go on any of the social medias and you put in Early Years Thriving, we are there. Our website is www.earlyyearsthriving.com. We have a variety of different, learning opportunities for educators, including the one-off webinars and workshops. We've got online summits that I do provide to the community on a yearly and bi-yearly basis. And then the other fun thing that we do with that is I take 10% of the revenues and then donate to local charities here. We also have an annual subscription that provides educators, honestly, the access to like all of it, like the one-off workshops, the online, the live workshops, the self-paced workshops, the annual, the online summit. So that is probably the best value.
That's wonderful information. I encourage all the listeners to go to earlyyearsthriving.com and find out more about what Ana has to offer. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Hello again. So I'm back to talk a little bit about this topic of professional learning and becoming a lifelong learner. I really feel passionate about professional development, and I know that Ana made a distinction during the podcast between professional learning and professional development. And usually we tend to think of professional development as, for instance, I'm going to a course, I'm going to be there for 2 hours, I need to get a certificate at the end, and I'm calling that professional development. However, I really believe that her definition of professional learning is much, much more than that. It's more than just attending training, let's say, and obtaining a particular certificate to prove that you attended the training. It's about having a growth mindset, wanting to learn more so that you can apply that learning to your profession. As early childhood educators, we are professionals and we are regulated by an organization and has particular guidelines. So I really believe professional learning is about learning to become a lifelong learner. So to me, what does it mean to be a lifelong learner? A lifelong learner is somebody who is constantly seeking new information to better themselves, to better the way they do their work. I'm constantly learning in various kinds of ways, whether it's reading a book, like a physical book, or listening to an audiobook, or listening to a podcast like this one, or attending, an online training, researching something on the internet, reading a newsletter. All of these ways of learning contribute to how I will do my job and how I will be myself. And I think that's what it means to be a lifelong learner, is to constantly obtaining information and strategies and tips and new ways of doing things and being open to learning new things all the time. I always think that we learn from children just as much as they learn from us as educators. I think that being a lifelong learner helps you to become a better educator. As an early childhood educator, I do believe that professional learning or professional development is critical to the development of the early childhood education field. It's the process of continuing to learn through activities that are intended to prepare you for your best work with young children and families. Thanks for tuning in to the ECE Classroom with Susie Beghin. For more information, you can visit our website at www.susiebeghin.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. Thanks for listening.